Hello world, it's me, Julian Venables, the London Astrologer, and I'm here to talk to you today about the amazing Jupiter and Saturn conjunction at the beginning of Aquarius that is actually occurring right now. In Earth element for all of 2020, which was very grounding and challenging and held us back in so many ways. But now the Jupiter and Saturn have moved into Aquarius, and we're now going to start to experience a lift as we move from the Earth into the air element. And Earth is, nothing goes below Earth. It's an infrastructure, it's a solid base. That's been our existence for 200 years. We're now moving into air. It's a new beginning, a new awakening, a new lift upwards. Let's start thinking about the differences between earth and air from the human point of view, from the human experience. Let's look at a little bit of philosophy behind this, because it will give you a richer and a deeper, more profound experience of what we're going through. The word human is cognate with the word humus, which means of the earth, or rising up out of the earth. That's what we are. As humans, we are rising up out of the earth. We are stood upon the earth. And because we are corporeal, earthy beings, we're made of a physical matter. The four elements, of course, are a co-mixture in this realm, in our earthly realm. We are a co-mixture of fire, earth, air and water. But the idea that that solidity, that form and that matter, that physical matter can be of earth is a very important thing. So it's about understanding that. And so the human experience is to rise out of earth and into the air. And we are in the air as we walk around, as we exist our lives. It is fully in us and around us, all around us. In fact, air, or the sky even, the sky, we are in the sky. It's our relationship to sky. The sky begins at our feet. That's where it starts. And we are in Sky Dome. We're in this dome, this space around us. Air is like a second skin, because we're breathing it in and out all day long. It's actually a very intimate element, because we take it into our bodies, we take it out of our body, all like this. And it feeds us quietly. It's like it stokes our inner fires. So air is this thing that we quite often take for granted. It's involuntary but essential. So it's an action that we tend to forget about, but it is the metronome of our lives. We're doing it all the time, breathing in and out. And we only tend to remember that we need the importance of air, becomes more conscious to us when we have to gasp for air or to hold our breaths, or then we realise, oh, we're needing that oxygen. I think the world at the moment needs to have some healing around air, around the concept of air. There's because now these outer planets have moved into Aquarius, and when Saturn moved into Aquarius in March originally, then we had, the whole COVID thing. But breath and air is there. And if we take a spiritual overview of it, we can look to the Shakespeare quote from Romeo and Juliet. When Juliet says to her nurse, "How art thou out of breath, when thou hast breath to say to me that thou art out of breath?" It's an interesting idea. of the movement of air around us. So, as part of our human experience, as we evolved in air and took our shape and form as humans in our over billions of years, then that air moving through us, as we learnt and understood breath, we were able to communicate. So the air moves past the larynx, the pharynx, the nasal passages. It moves in and out of these. And then we become the beings with this glorious gift of language. So Aquarius is the water bearer, and the image we have of that constellation is of a human pouring a container of water through the air. And this is where we see that it's the action of the water moving through the air that is part of the reason of Aquarius. That aligns with the idea of its symbol as well. Because air has some of the same qualities as water. It has distinct flows and movements. It is almost like water and windy air move in waves. They are circulating and swirling, and that makes you think of some of those ancient images of like the little characters who are blowing the wind, and you see it moving out as streams that circle around. The idea of how wind is imaged and pictured and imagined to be is not too dissimilar to the flow of a water making swirls and spirals and little eddies and movements in as it progresses. Wind it can be imagined to be the same, and it does make similar things. Like when you look at clouds, you can see sometimes that movement of moisture gathering in air. Again, this is actually the idea of water being suspended in air, and they have those kind of rounded shapes that could be seen as being circulating or swirling, or the movement. And this is how air carries things. So air being a carrier of something like this, the movement of air. So that, of course, brings us to this idea of what is this all-encompassing space that we are in? Because how do we use it? We see it in a huge space, but it's where the insects are flying. It's where the birds are flying. For man-made things, it's where planes are flying. It's this idea that it is a lot of movement going on up in that space. It's also where dust is suspended. It's where seeds are floating. It's where spores and fungi and all these things. There's a lot of life suspended in that air as it moves around the planet and around us. So when we think more about air, we also think about this idea of how it is. It influences the weather. We go outside, we feel the temperature in the air. We feel the breeze. We feel the moisture in the air, the barometers of life. And it's that ever-changing weather that affects our disposition and our moods. And therefore, we have to understand how to use the air. So, for example, in sports, running and exercise, and people will have breathing techniques. They will have methods of bringing that air to them to generate that force, that power that they need. But also in yoga, there is the pranayama, which is the movement and exercise of air in order to energize. And then in pure meditation, it's about the movement of air and the feeling of the sensation as it moves up in through the nostrils. Sensations moving therefore into the lungs, moving down to the navel and back out again. This is a whole process. So this is all air. And these are some of the things we can be starting to think about with this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. Long ago we saw it, the space around us as the abode of the gods. People would supplement to the gods. They would reach up to the sky. They look up to the sky and say, raise the hands up into the air. The gods and the goddesses are in that atmosphere, which is the Greek. Atmos is the vapor, sphere is the ball. The idea we are in the atmosphere. And in Athens they had the Tower of the Winds, which is like they built this tower which showed the direction of wind, and that was the direction of movement of things. It was almost as if they had an awareness of how the mood or the things of the people might be affected by the wind, speed of the wind, temperature of the wind. And in the world around us, we have so much to do with the winds. For example, it's the names of winds. There are many, many different names for different types of winds that happen at different times of year and in different places. So, the shipping, ancient shipping, trade winds, in deserts, desert winds. All these different things are so important to the understanding of the movement of air. So when we have this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, we're looking at this idea of where are we going? This uplift, this new consciousness of air. We're going to be lifting up into it. This is all the new beginnings that we're going to have. It's very exciting. So let's look a bit more now at the idea of Jupiter and Saturn and what they're doing in Aquarius. And Aquarius is, as I said, this 11th sign of the zodiac. It's still a winter sign. It's a fixed sign in the middle of winter, and it is part of its more positive expressions is about truth-seeking, intellectualism, and scientific concept. It is the idea that Aquarius, because everyone would be still in their houses in winter, so there'll be a lot of talking, when societies or groups or communities would be brought together in winter. There wasn't much going outside. The ground was still quite cold and frozen. The wind would be picking up. It was usually very cold from late January to February. People would gather and they would talk a lot, and so therefore that is the idea of Aquarius being the communicator. It's about being friendly, it's about being humane and kind and people oriented. It's about being very open-minded, unprejudiced. It's about being tolerant. So these are very important Aquarian indicators of how we can expect to see this next 20-year cycle. And it all comes at a perfect time because we so need this right now, collectively. So there's a lot about being individualistic and unconventional. So think freely, think differently. These are good things to happen. It's about being innovative and inventive. We're going to have these fantastic, original, unique, unusual things that are going to be happening in the world. It's really amazing. And it's going to be about being determined and resolute because it's a fixed sign. It doesn't change. So when you get a good idea, you can work with your idea. And also it's about independence and freedom loving. And that's why right now, with this current set of current affairs, the current news, people are going, well, what are we going to do? It's a challenge to, in fact, be freedom loving. So Jupiter and Saturn together now at 0 degrees Aquarius. When Jupiter and Saturn meet every 20 years, they provide a new or essentially a reworked or a reset for a framework for society. That's what Jupiter and Saturn do together. So they build on a social economic structure. The idea that a civilization can be ordered and shaped. The ancients didn't know what was past Saturn, so Jupiter and Saturn were the boundaries, and they are the conscious things that we can work with in life. So it's about having those and working with them. And therefore, when Jupiter represents growth and expansion, Saturn is limits and limitations and contractual control. You bring them together, and you start to have rules and limits to things. What's possible, moral boundaries, should we call them? And so this time with Aquarius, we're looking at this idea of humanitarianism, progressive, scientific, insightful. Aquarius is very spiritual because of this idea of air, and at the same time it's scientific. So we're going to get a merging of the science and religion. It's time, 20-year cycle starting now. Very exciting times. And when Jupiter does things in abundance and excess, Saturn weighs things and measures things and structures things and is the heaviness, the solidity, the gravity of something. So Jupiter wants to think broad-mindedly, wide scopes, large horizons. Saturn wants to focus in, be quite oppressive and build a wall or a border to something. So it's about, the combinations of these two things, in the news right now. Where is Brexit taking us, Now the questions are going to be different. The insights are going to be different. Jupiter and Saturn have just changed sign. Something new is on its way. So there may be a lot of joy with Jupiter and Aquarius. It's an more uplifting, But Saturn would be more of a distance to it. The idea of social distancing was when Saturn moved into Aquarius last time. But we'll see what happens with that. And it's about the idea of, movement of things again with Jupiter, How can we travel? How can we move? How can we culturally mingle? Saturn says, stick to one thing. So we must be careful not to become too impersonal or too detached because, or too abstract or too logical, There's going to be a sense of a possible intolerance, It can occur. But I feel that we've got a sense of revolution of ideas, and we must stay optimistic. Jupiter's very optimistic. Let's stay optimistic with this and see where we go with it. This year they're going to have the Saturn square Uranus. It's actually starting its orb now. So this is another very, very interesting thing. So I wish you all well in your discoveries of how Jupiter and Saturn will happen for you in Aquarius. Do ask me for readings. I'm available for readings. And do subscribe, please, by clicking the button below the screen here. Welcome to leave a comment. I will try to reply to them in person. And find me as Jupiter. Find me as Julian, the London Astrologer. And my website is londonastrologer.com. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And it's been a pleasure talking to you today. And do tune in for more. I will be back soon. Wishing you all well. Thank you and goodbye.